Grab your popcorn, Wargamers, because today we're going to the movies. And by movies, I mean we're staying home and taking advantage of streaming technology to watch a movie because the movie theaters are still closed for no good reason. As you can see, we are back at the beach, and that means it's time for another review. Today we're talking about Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of Dungeons and Dragons. And my arm is getting tired, so I'm going to shift this down here to the gearbox. Let me just, I got to move my face curtain out of the way. Caesar needs his pinch. Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of Dungeons and Dragons, is a documentary that, despite what it says on the tin, it's not really so much about Dungeons and Dragons. Remember, this is a wargaming channel, not a tabletop role-playing game channel. So why am I telling you that you as a wargamer need to go watch this movie, Secrets of Blackmoor? Because it's not really about Dungeons and Dragons. That's the finish line. That's where this movie is headed to. But before you can get to Dungeons and Dragons, you've got to go through an awful lot of miniature wargaming. Booyah! And that's what we're all about here at the Joy of Wargaming. The producers understand that they're telling a story. And to use a historical analogy, if you were to make a movie about the birth of the United States of America, you would go through everything leading up to July 4th, 1776. You would go through some of the early battles of the Revolutionary War, and that's essentially what this film does. Now, I also want to tell you one more thing that it's not, because I was very reticent to watch this movie. This is, as you can see, it's about Blackmoor. And Blackmoor was the campaign, whether you want to call it a role-playing campaign or a miniature wargaming campaign, is irrelevant. The point is that it was a campaign that was done by a feller by the name of Dave Arneson. And Dave Arneson was contemporary of Gary Gygax, and in the original Dungeons and Dragons, it was listed as by Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax. My reticence to watch this film arose from the fact that I have no interest in watching a movie that's all about acrimonious he said, she said, who invented, who was the first, who whatever. This particular game was very organically grown, and it involved the input of an awful lot of people, and I have little interest in who was the first to run the first Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game. That's not what this is. They're very agnostic as to who invented Dungeons and Dragons, and the producers do acknowledge that a lot of people had a lot to do with the birth of this particular hobby. Most of those people were miniature war gamers, and that's why I think you are going to be interested in watching Secrets of Blackmoor, because I would say about the first 2/3 of the movie are more about what the miniature wargaming scene was like in the Twin Cities area, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the 1960s. Dave Arneson was a young man who was indoctrinated and kind of glommed onto a group of older... Boy, this sounds so bad these days, doesn't it? He actually fell in with an older crowd who was very well read. He was an intelligent young man who needed mentors who were older gentlemen who could kind of introduce him to the finer points of history and gamesmanship. And they would meet in basements for the purposes of miniature wargaming. And that's why I loved watching this film, because it shows exactly what it was like to play miniature wargamings back during the proto-history of our hobby. I gotta warn you, I'm not happy with the direction that our hobby has taken towards the corporate end of things. And I have been returning to tradition. I have been looking backwards 30, 40, 50 years to see where the hobby got started, to see what items of value have been jettisoned and lost. And one of my missions as a burgeoning YouTube host is to invite you to come along with me on this journey of rediscovery. Secrets of Blackmoor played a large role in my decision to do that, because so much of this film is taken up with what a fantastic time these guys had. And I should also point out, the film uses the wargamers in Minneapolis-St. Paul as a bit of a case study for what it was like to be a miniature wargamer back in those days, when you didn't have a whole lot of slick, marketed, mass-produced, vanilla games to play. People were largely they had like 6 books to draw on, 3 of which were written in the 1880s. They were literally inventing all of the concepts that we take for granted today, and they were having a blast doing it. There will be those that will tell you, well, of course they were having fun doing that. They didn't know any better. The conceit being that, well, you know, if Gary Gygax, as he was writing Chainmail, if he only knew about the glorious wonders of Warhammer 40k 9th edition, he wouldn't have even bothered. What would be the point? He would have just, stuck his head under a pillow and just waited for this modern, glorious future to arrive, to which the only rational response is abject, derisive laughter. I mean, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson were having a great time in these days before the birth of Dungeons and Dragons. And they were having a great time before the homogeneity of the hobby came around, where everybody's using the same terrain from the same 4 manufacturers. They've all got their MDF buildings that are painted to the same standard. They've all got figures from one of, half dozen manufacturers. No, they were doing things unique and different, and everyone around the country was doing the same thing. There were groups of guys meeting in basements, using the same 3 books as Arneson and Gygax, and taking those books and building their own style of gaming. And they were arguing about all the usual stuff. Well, how far do you think these guys can move? What kind of fun new rules can we do? What kind of scenarios can we prepare? They spent a lot of time and a lot of effort thinking about this hobby, not just reading what other people told them they should be doing. They were having a great time, and they were having a great time with, take a look at this. Take a look at this picture. This is a screen cap from Secrets of Blackmoor. And I think this is Dave Arneson here, this young man here. I think that might be Dave Arneson. But I really like this because it shows, this is just, some lumber with some figures. And, they do, oh, look at what they do. They use blue fabric cut into shapes for their rivers. Do we still do that today? I think we do. They got a couple of trees, the figures. You can kind of see how the battle is developing here. So much information packed into this one little picture. And, it's there we go. Little settlement over here, and you've got some raiders coming in with some block troops resisting them. It's fantastic. Look at what this guy's using. I love this picture because look at this Chad. He's like, F it. I'm bringing a full-on yardstick for my measurements. Well, it looks like he's running some cavalry, so they move pretty quick. And where are the miniatures stored? Yeah, in a box under the table. I'm telling you, brother, the more things change, the more things stay the same. But they're having a great time. They're involved in this hobby that is, you can tell they read a lot because they've got glasses. Glasses means you read a lot. These guys are having a blast. I got another one here to show you. All right, look at this table. They got terrain marked out with tape. Just like duct tape. Here's blue tape, and it literally says, pond. These figures are not painted to the standard that we would recognize as top-notch today. When you go watch Secrets of Blackmoor, you'll find that they're pretty rough, man. These figures are like 35 millimeter. They probably had a hard time figuring out which scale to use and and they're painted to. I mean, they're not using paints that are specifically and expressly designed for miniature war games, right? They had no Games Workshop. They had no what's the other company called? Armory. They were basically using the paints for the same kind of Estes oil-based paints that they were using on their model cars. And they're pretty rough. But man, you get that many of them down on a table, they could probably paint a figure in a couple of minutes, and you get that many on a table, it starts to look like something else, huh? Right? Little woodblock buildings, roads marked out with tape. And they spent a lot of time fighting over what the rules meant and fighting with the judges. Oh, no, they can't move that far. Oh, no, they can't cross that turn. Oh, no, they can't do that. And they probably were shouting references at each other. Well, you know, in this book, the guy said that cavalry did X. And in that book, it said the cavalry did Y. And they spent a heck of a lot of time just arguing and debating. Debating is the better term. That's the more erudite term for what they were doing. And having a grand old time doing it. Well, man, if they were having so much fun, then why can't we? Why do we have to shell out $80 for a dozen miniatures and someone to hold our hands and expressly define every single thing about this hobby? The answer is we don't. And even if your table is unrecognizable to a guy that plays the same scenario halfway across the country, who cares? It's your table. Do your thing, brother. The movie does segue. Now, one of the things that they did to try to add more realism to their games was implement scouting and a little bit of political intrigue. And if you could do well at the political game, then you would have little bonuses on the miniature war game, which is a lot of fun. And they put together a game called Braunstein. I'm not going to give you as much detail as the movie will, but essentially Braunstein was a game where the judge of the miniature war game laid out a scenario where there's all kinds of skullduggery going on in a university / monastery on the border of two countries. And he said, here's you're going to be the general of the German forces, and here's what you need to do to make sure that you get all the cavalry that you need. Now, he was lying. There was no game. There was no miniature war game to follow. It was all about the political skullduggery. And then this movie actually walks you through how that inspired a Western version called Brownstone, Texas, I think it was. And then how Arneson took those ideas and crafted them and molded them to his own table. And he said, I'm going to use this fella Gygax wrote a game called Chainmail, and we're going to use that, but we're going to, instead of mass blocks, you're each going to have one character with maybe a couple of henchmen. And then we're going to go into this fairyland where, I'll run everything else, and there'll be a poker game under a troll bridge, but yada yada. And the next thing you know, there's a thing called Dungeons and Dragons. And then, I kind of start to fall asleep because I'm a miniature war. This is, look at it. See the spears and the flags? This is where it's at for me, baby. This is where, and then they get into, and I just kind of, my eyes start to glaze over, and I have visions of pink hair and but it's still a great movie, and I think you can order the DVD for like $5. You can stream it. I streamed it on Amazon.com. I'll put a link in the description right down there. Right, the description. You know that area? It's right below where the like and the subscribe and the comment buttons are. It's right below. Find the comment button, and then right below that is where. And if you've seen this movie and you have any thoughts and feelings, if it inspired any sense of nostalgia and a desire to go back and take a look at what these guys were doing, let me know, because I got to warn you, the next review that I'm going to do is going to be a Donald Featherstone book. I had a couple of commenters that have name-checked Tony Bath. Yeah, I know about Tony Bath, baby. Now, I wasn't allowed to go to the first Gen Con because my mom was like, no, John, you're only 3 years old, and you're not even going to play Dungeons & Dragons for another 2 years. And I had issues that were just insurmountable, like logistic issues. I couldn't go to game conventions, until I was a little bit older than 3 years old. But the point is, watching this movie reminds me even what it was like in the late 70s and early 80s and how much fun we had on that voyage of discovery. And what I'm telling you is you can go back to Spain and look out as a new Columbus across this wide, broad ocean and wonder what's out there beyond the horizon, and where Steve Jackson and, Ian Livingstone went that way, you may find a new course off that way, and you may find a better hobby that's perfectly suited just for you. So go watch Secrets of Blackmoor. It's a fine film, and they're doing another one that's more about Dungeons & Dragons. If you're into Dungeons & Dragons, hey, I'm not judging, right? If you like Dungeons & Dragons, that's fine. That's your thing. Go have fun. Now, there's literally thousands of YouTube channels for Dungeons & Dragons, and some of them, I imagine, are good people. But we're talking about the war games, and this is a great film for miniature war gamers. It's very warm, it's very friendly, it's very inviting, and this is our heritage. This is where we as war gamers come from. So go learn some lessons and brace yourself for more return to tradition and more looking back at the world of wargaming that was and the world of wargaming that still may be. Here at the Joy of Wargaming, where we talk about all things wargaming. God bless you. That's all I have for today. Oh, I already said God bless you. That's supposed to be my tagline. I forgot. I guess I'm just rambling now. Anyway, God bless you. Goodbye.